I'm Ryan O'Dowd, and you're listening to Ryan's Audiobooks on the Issues Magazine YouTube channel. Today I'm continuing with Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth by R. Buckminster Fuller. Section 2.7, Chapter 6, Synergy. We will now tackle our present world problems with the family of powerful thought tools: topology, geodesics, synergetics, general systems theory, and the computer's operational bitting. To ensure our inclusion of all the variables with which we must eventually deal, we will always start synergetically with universe. Now that universe is defined and thus provides us with the master containment, we will then state our unique problem and divest ourselves progressively and definitively of all the micro-macro irrelevancies. Are humans necessary? Are there experiential clues that human intellect has an integral function in regenerative universe as has gravity? How can Earthians fulfill their function and thus avoid extinction as unfit? To start with, we will now progressively subdivide universe and isolate the thinkable concept by bits through progressively dismissing residual irrelevancies. Our first isolated bit is the system, which at maximum is the starry macrocosm, and at minimum, the atomic nucleus. The second bit reduces the macrocosmic limit to that of the galactic nebula. The third bit separates our cosmic radiation, gravity, and the solar system. And the fourth bit isolates the cosmic radiation, gravity, sun, its energized life-bearing spaceship Earth, together with the Earth's moon as the most prominent component of the life regeneration on spaceship Earth. I would like to inventory rapidly the system variables which I find to be by far the most powerful in the consideration of our present life-regenerating evolution aboard our spaceship, as it is continually refueled radiationally by the sun and other cosmic radiation. Thus we may by due process suddenly and excitingly discover why we are here alive in the universe and identify ourselves as presently operating here aboard our spaceship and situated aboard its spherical deck at, for example, Washington, D.C. on the North American continent, thinking effectively regarding the relevant contemporary and local experiences germane to the solution of humanity's successful and happy survival aboard our planet. We may thus discover not only what needs to be done in a fundamental way, but also we may discover how it may be accomplished by our own directly seized initiative, undertaken and sustained without any further authority than that of our function in the universe, where the most ideal is the most realistically practical. Thus we may avoid all the heretofore frustrating factors of uninspired patron guidance of our work, such as the patron's supine concessions to the non-synergetical thinking, and therefore ignorantly conditioned reflexes of the least well-advised of the potential mass customers. Typical of the subsidiary problems within the whole human survival problem, whose ramifications now go beyond the prerogatives of planners and must be solved, is the problem of pollution in general. Pollution not only of our air and water, but also of the information stored in our brains. We will soon have to rename our planet Polluto. In respect to our planet's life-sustaining atmosphere, we find that yes, we do have technically feasible ways of precipitating the fumes, and after this we say, but it costs too much. There are also ways of desalinating seawater, and we say, but it costs too much. This too narrow treatment of the problem never faces the inexorably evolving and solution-insistent problem of what it will cost when we don't have the air and water with which to survive. It takes months to starve to death, weeks to thirst to death, but only minutes to suffocate. We cannot survive without water for the length of time it takes to produce and install desalination equipment adequate to supply, for instance, all of New York City. A sustained and often threatened water shortage in New York City would mean death for millions of humans. Each time the threat passes, the old statement, it costs too much, again blocks realization of the desalination capability. Anybody who has been in Washington, and approximately everyone else everywhere today, is familiar with governmental budgeting and with the modes of developing public recognition of problems and of bringing about official determination to do something about solutions. In the end, the problems are rarely solved, not because we don't know how, but because it's discovered either that it is said by those in authority that it costs too much, or that when we identify the fundamental factors of the environmental problems, and laws are enacted to cope incisively with those factors, that there are no funds presently known to be available with which to implement the law. There comes a money bill a year later for implementation, and with it the political criteria of assessing wealth by which the previous year's bill would now seemingly, quote-unquote, cost too much. So compromises follow compromises. Frequently nothing but political promises or under-budgeted solutions result. The original legislation partially stills the demands, the pressures on the politicians are lowered, and the lack of implementation is expeditiously shrugged off because of seemingly more pressing, seemingly higher priority new demands for the money. The most pressing of those demands is for war, for which the politicians suddenly accredit weaponry acquisitions and military tasks costing many times their previously asserted concepts of what we can afford. Thus, under lethal emergencies, vast new magnitudes of wealth come mysteriously into effective operation. We don't seem to be able to afford to do peacefully the logical things we say we ought to do to forestall warring, by producing enough to satisfy all the world needs. Under pressure, we always find that we can afford to wage the wars brought about by the vital struggle of have-nots to share or take over the bounty of the haves, simply because it had seemed, theretofore, to cost too much to provide vital support to those have-nots. The haves are thus forced in self-defense suddenly to articulate and realize productive wealth capabilities worth many times the amount of monetary units they had known themselves to possess, and far more importantly, many times what it would have cost to give adequate economic support to the particular have-nots involved in the warring, and in fact to all the world's have-nots. Editor's note. Bucky here is saying the politicians prefer to spend more money trying to control people than they are to get people the needs fulfilled that they have, which would stop them from being out of control. An interesting note. Moving on. The adequately macro, comprehensive, and micro-incisive solutions to any and all vital problems never cost too much. The production of heretofore non-existent production tools and industrial networks of harnessed energy do more work, does not cost anything but human time, which is refunded in time gained minutes after the inanimate machinery goes to work. Nothing is spent. Potential wealth has become real wealth. As it is cliched, in the end, problem solutions always cost the least if paid for adequately at the outset of the vital problem's recognition. Being vital, the problems are evolutionary, inexorable, and ultimately unavoidable by humanity. The constantly put off or undermet costs and society's official bumbling of them clearly prove that man does not know at present what wealth is, nor how much of whatever it may be is progressively available to him. We have now flushed out a major variable in our general systems problem of man aboard Earth. The question, what is wealth, commands our prime consideration. The Wall Street Journal reported, the September-October 1967 deliberations of the International Monetary Fund held at Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Many years and millions of dollars were spent maneuvering for and assembling this monetary convention, and the net result was the weak opinion that it would soon be time to consider doing something about money. The convention felt our international balance of payments and its gold demand system to be inadequate. They decided that the old pirate's gold was still irreplaceable, but that after a few years they might have to introduce some new gimmick to augment the gold as an international monetary base. At present, there is about $70 billion of mined gold known to exist on board our Spaceship Earth. A little more than half of it, about $40 billion, is classified as being monetary. That is, it exists in the form of various national coinages or in the form of officially banked gold bullion bars. The remaining $30 billion is in private metallic hoards, jewelry, gold teeth, etc. Since banks have no money of their own and only our deposits on which they earn interest, bank wealth or money consists only of accrued bank income. Income represents an average return of 5% on capital invested. We may assume, therefore, from an estimate of the world's annual gross product that the capital assets in the form of industrial production on board our Spaceship Earth are at present worth in excess of $1 quadrillion. The world's total of $70 billion in gold represents only 3/1000ths of 1% of the value of the world's organized industrial production resources. The gold supply is so negligible as to make it pure voodoo to attempt to valve the world's economic evolution traffic through the gold-sized needle's eye. Gold was used for trading by the great pirates in lieu of any good faith whatsoever, and in lieu of any mutual literacy, scientific knowledge, intelligence, or scientific and technical know-how on both sides of the trading. Gold trading assumed universal rascality to exist. Yet the realization of the planners' earnest conceptioning and feasible work on behalf of the ill-fated 60% of humanity are entirely frustrated by this kind of nonsense. We therefore proceed ever more earnestly with our general systems analysis of the problems of human survival, with the premise that at present neither the world's political officials nor its bankers know what wealth is. In organizing our thoughts to discover and clarify what wealth is, we also will attempt to establish an effective means to develop immediate working procedures for solution of such big problems. I have tried out the following intellectual filtering procedure with both multi-thousand general public audiences and with audiences of only 100 or so advanced scholars, and I have never experienced disagreement with my progression of residual conclusions. I proceed as follows. I am going to make a series of analytical statements to you, and if anyone disagrees with me on any statement, we will discard that statement. Only those of my statements which remain 100% unprotested will be rated as being acceptable to all of us. First of all, I say, no matter what you think wealth may be, and no matter how much you have of it, you cannot alter one iota of yesterday. No protest? We've learned some lessons. We can say that wealth is irreversible in evolutionary processes. Is there anyone who disagrees with any of my statements thus far about what wealth is or not? Good. No disagreement. We will go on. Now I'm going to have a man in a shipwreck. He's rated as a very rich man, worth over $1 billion by all of society's accredited conceptions of real wealth. He has taken with him on his voyage all his stocks and bonds, all his property deeds, all his checkbooks, and to play it safe, has brought along a lot of diamonds and gold bullion. The ship burns and sinks, and there are no lifeboats, for they too have burned. If our billionaire holds on to his gold, he's going to sink a little faster than the others. So I would say he hadn't much left, either of now or tomorrow, in which to articulate his wealth, and since wealth cannot work backwardly, his kind of wealth is vitally powerless. It really is a worthless pile of chips of an arbitrary game which we are playing, and does not correspond to the accounting processes of our real universe's evolutionary transactions. Obviously, the catastrophied billionaire's kind of wealth has no control over either yesterday, now, or tomorrow. He can't extend his life with that kind of wealth unless he can persuade the one passenger who has a life jacket to yield that only means of extending one's life in exchange for one crazy moment's sense of possession of all the billionaire's sovereign powers back legal tender, all of which the catastrophe disillusioned and only moments earlier powerfully rich and now desperately helpless man would thankfully trade for the physical means of extending the years of his life or of his wife. It is also worth remembering that the validity of what our reputedly rich man in the shipwreck had in those real estate equities went back only to the validity in the eyes of God of the original muscle, cunning, and weapons established sovereign claimed lands and their subsequent legal redeedings as quote-unquote legal properties, protected by the moral or no weapons enforced laws of the sovereign nations and the subsequent abstraction into limited liability corporation equities printed on paper stocks and bonds. The procedure we are pursuing is that of true democracy. Semi-democracy accepts the dictatorship of a majority in establishing its arbitrary, ergo unnatural laws. True democracy discovers by patient experiment and unanimous acknowledgement what the laws of nature or universe may be for the physical support and metaphysical satisfaction of the human intellect's function in universe. I now go on to speculate what I think that what we all really mean by wealth is as follows. Wealth is our organized capability to cope effectively with the environment in sustaining our healthy regeneration and decreasing both the physical and metaphysical restrictions of the forward days of our lives. Is there any disagreement? Well, having first disposed of what wealth is not, we now have produced a called-out statement that roughly contains somewhere within it a precise definition of what wealth is. Now we can account wealth more precisely as the number of forward days for a specific number of people we are physically prepared to sustain at a physically stated time and space liberating level of metabolic and metaphysical regeneration. We are getting sharper, inasmuch as we now are learning more intimately about our spaceship Earth and its radiation supply, ship Sun, on the one hand, and on the other its moon acting as the Earth's gravitationally pulsing alternator, which together constitute the prime generator and regenerator of our life-supporting system. I must observe also that we're not going to sustain life at all except by our successful impoundment of more of the sun's radiant energy aboard our spaceship than we are losing from Earth in the energies of radiation or outwardly rocketed physical matter. We should burn up the spaceship Earth itself to provide energy, but that would give us very little future. Our space vehicle is similar to a human child. It's an increasing aggregate of physical and metaphysical processes in contradistinction to a withering, decomposing corpse. It is obvious that the real wealth of life aboard our planet is forwardly operative, metabolic, and intellectual regenerating system. Quite clearly, we have vast amounts of income, wealth, as sun radiation and moon gravity to implement our forward success. Wherefore, living only on our energy savings by burning up the fossil fuels which took billions of years to impound from the sun, or living on our capital by burning up the Earth's atoms, is lethally ignorant and also utterly irresponsible to our coming generations in their forward days. Our children and their children are our future days. If we do not comprehend and realize our potential ability to support all life forever, we are cosmically bankrupt. Having identified the ignorance of society regarding its wealth capabilities to be a major factor in the frustration of effective planning, and having roughly identified the meaning of wealth to which everyone can realistically subscribe, and intending later to sharpen its identity, we will now tackle the next phase of humanity's total survival, prosperity, happiness, and regenerative inspiration with the problem-solving power of general systems theory as combined with both computer strategy, which is known as cybernetics, and with synergetics, the latter consisting of the solving of problems by starting with known behaviors of whole systems plus the known behaviors of some of the system's parts, which advantageous information makes possible the discovery of other parts of the system and their respective behaviors, as for instance in geometry, the known sum, 180 degrees, of a triangle's angles, plus the known behavior of any two sides, and their included angle and vice versa, enables the discovery and use of the precise values of the other three parts. Synergetics discloses that wealth, which represents our ability to deal successfully with our forward energetic regeneration and provide increased degrees of freedom of initiation in non-interfering actions, breaks down cybernetically into two main parts, physical energy and metaphysical know-how. Physical energy, in turn, divides into two interchangeable phases, associative and dissociative, energy associative as matter and energy dissociative as radiation. Stating first that the physical universe is all energy and symbolized energy by E, Einstein formulated his famous equation E equals m, matter's mass explained in the terms of c squared, speed of an omnidirectional radiant surface wave's expansion unfettered in a vacuum. Energy as matter and energy as radiation, as Einstein had generalized hypothetically, were explicitly proven by fission to be interchangeable covariants. Physicists also have discovered experimentally that energy can neither be exhausted nor originated. Energy is finite and infinitely conserved. This experimentally proven realization of some prime facts of physical universe contradicts the thoughts of cosmologists, cosmogonists, and society's economics expressed before the speed of light was measured at the beginning of the 20th century. I came to Harvard University in the beginning of the century just before World War I. At that time, it was as yet the consensus of scholarly thinking that because the universe itself was seemingly a system, it too must be subject to entropy, by which every local system was found experimentally to be continually losing energy. Hence, the universe itself was thought to be losing energy. This indicated that the universe was quote-unquote running down, at which time evolution would abandon its abnormal energetic behavior, and all would return to Newton's norm of at rest. This being so, it was also assumed that all those who expended energy were recklessly speeding the end. This was the basis of yesterday's conservatism. All who expended energy in bringing about further evolutionary changes were to be aboard. They were to be known as reckless spenders. All this was assumed to be true before experiments at the beginning of the 20th century gave scientists knowledge of the speed of light and of radiation in general. Thus, we suddenly discovered it took 8 minutes for the light to get to us from the sun, 2.5 years from the nearest star beyond the sun, and many years for it to reach us from other stars. We learned only 2/3 of a century ago that many stars we considered as instantly there had burned out thousands of years ago. The universe is not simultaneous. Then Einstein, Planck, and other leading scientists said we're going to have to reassess and redefine the physical universe. They defined the physical universe as an aggregate of non-simultaneously and only partially overlapping transformation events. And then they had said, we must discover what it is we see when we observe new life forming. It could be that when energy dissociates here, it always may be reassociating somewhere else, and that in all subsequent experimentation proved to be the case. The scientists found that the energy redistributions always added up to 100%. The scientists then formulated a new description of the physical universe, which they called the new law of conservation of energy, which said that physical experiments disclose that energy can neither be created nor lost. Energy is not only conserved, but it is also finite. It is a closed system. The universe is a mammoth perpetual motion process. We then see that the part of our wealth which is physical energy is conserved. It cannot be exhausted, cannot be spent, which means exhausted. We realize that the word spending is now scientifically meaningless and is therefore obsolete. I referred earlier to man's discovery of the lever. Having used levers for millennium, man thought of taking a series of bucket-ended levers and of inserting the non-bucket end of each lever perpendicularly into a shaft arranged one after another like spokes around a wheel. He mounted that shaft in bearings, put it under a waterfall, and let gravity fill each bucket in turn, and then pull each filled bucket towards the center of the planet Earth, thus progressively rotating all the levers and making the wheel and its shaft rotate with great power. Then man connected this revolving shaft by pulley belts to other pulleys on other shafts, which drove machines to do many metabolically regenerating tasks in a way unmatchable by man's muscle power alone. Man thus began for the first time to really employ his intellect in the most important way. He discovered how to use energy as a matter in the form of levers, shafts, gear trains, and dams, and how to take advantage of and use the energy as sun radiation, which vaporized and elevated water as an atmospheric cloud, allowing it then to be precipitated and pulled back toward the center of spherical Earth from the spherical mantle of clouds in the form of water molecules collected in droplets. From this moment of comprehending energy circuits and thenceforth, man's really important function in the universe was his intellection, which taught him to intercept and redirect local energy patternings in the universe, and thus to reorganize and shunt those flow patterns so that they would impinge on levers to increase humanity's capabilities to do the manifold tasks leading directly and indirectly toward humanity's forward metabolic regeneration. What we now have demonstrated metaphysically is that every time man makes a new experiment, he always learns more. He cannot learn less. He may learn that which he thought was true and was not true by the elimination of a false premise. His basic capital wealth, in which is given lifetime, is disembarrassed of further preoccupation with considerations of how to employ a worthless, time-consuming hypothesis, freeing his time for its more effective exploratory investment to give man increased wealth. We find experimentally regarding the metaphysical phenomenon intellect, which we call know-how, that every time we employ and test our intellectual know-how by experimental rearrangement of physical energy interactions, either associated as mass or dissociated as radiation-free energy, we always learn more. The know-how can only increase. Very interesting. Now we have carefully examined and experimented with the two basic constituents of wealth, the physical and the metaphysical. Sum totally, we find that the physical constituent of wealth, energy, cannot decrease, and that the metaphysical constituent, know-how, can only increase. That is to say that every time we use our wealth, it increases. That is to say that, countering entropy, wealth can only increase. Whereas entropy is increasing disorder evoked by dispersion of energy, wealth locally is increased order. That is to say, the increasingly orderly concentration of physical power in our ever-expanding, locally explored and comprehended universe by the metaphysical capability of man, as informed by repeated experiments, from which he happens in an unscheduled manner to progressively distill the ever-increasing inventory of omni-interrelated and omni-interaccommodative generalized principles found to be operative in all the special case experiences. Irreversible wealth is the so far attained effective magnitude of our physically organized ordering of the use of those generalized principles. Wealth is anti-entropy at a most exquisite degree of concentration. The difference between mind and brain is that brain deals only with memorized, subjective, special case experiences and objective experiments, while mind extracts and employs the generalized principles and integrates and interrelates their effective employment. Brain deals exclusively with the physical, and mind exclusively with the metaphysical. Wealth is the product of the progressive mastery of matter by mind, and is specifically accountable in forward mandates of established metabolic regeneration advantages, spelt out in hours of life for specific numbers of individuals, released from formally prescribed entropy preoccupying tasks for their respectively individual yet inherently cooperative elective investment in further anti-entropic effectiveness. Because our wealth is continually multiplying in vast degree, unbeknownst and unacknowledged formally by human society, our economic accounting systems are unrealistically identifying wealth only as matter, and are entering know-how on the books only as salary liabilities. Therefore, all that we are discovering mutually here regarding the true nature of wealth comes as a complete surprise to world society, both communism and capitalism alike. Both social cooperation and individual enterprise interact to produce increasing wealth, all unrecognized by ignorantly assumed lethally competitive systems. All our formal accounting is anti-synergetic, depreciative, and entropic morganization, meaning death by inversely compounding interest. Wealth as anti-entropy develops compound interest through synergy, which growth is as yet entirely unaccounted anywhere around Earth, in any of its political economic systems. We give an intrinsic value to the material. To this we add the costs of manufacturing, which include energy, labor, overhead, and profit. We then start depreciating this figure, assuming swift obsolescence of the value of the product. With the exception of small royalties, which are generally avoided, no value is given for the inventiveness or for the synergistic value given by one product to another by virtue of their complementarity as team components whose teamwork produces results of enormous advantage, as for instance to the invention of alloyed drill bits of oil rigs bring petroleum from non-use to use. As a consequence of true wealth's unaccounted, inexorably synergistic multiplication of ever-increasing numbers of humanity's ever-increasing forward days, in this century alone, we have gone from less than 1% of humanity being able to survive in any important kind of health and comfort to 44% of humanity surviving at a standard of living unexperienced or undreamed of before. This utterly unpredicted synergistic success occurred within only 2/3 of a century despite continually decreasing metallic resources per each world person. It happened without being consciously and specifically attempted by any government or business. It also happened only as a consequence of man's inadvertently becoming equipped synergistically to do progressively more with less. As we have learned, synergy is the only word in our language which identifies the meaning for which it stands. Since the word is unknown to the average public, as I've already pointed out, it is not at all surprising that synergy has not been included in the economic accounting of our wealth transactions or in assessing our commonwealth capabilities. The synergetic aspect of industries doing ever more work with ever less investment of time and energy per each unit of performance of each and every function of the weapon carriers at sea, air, and outer space has never been formally accounted as a capital gain of land-situated society. This synergistic effectiveness of a world-around integrated industrial process is inherently vastly greater than the confined synergistic effect of sovereignly operating separate systems. Ergo, only complete world desovereignization can permit the realization of an all-humanity high-standard support. But the scientific facts are that simple tools that make complex tools are synergetically augmented by progressively more effective and previously unpredicted chemical elements alloying. The whole history of world industrialization demonstrates constantly surprising new capabilities resulting from various synergetic interactions amongst both the family of 92 regenerative and the transuranium members of the uniquely behaving chemical elements family. Complex environmental evolution is synergetically produced by the biologicals and their tools, as well as by the great inanimate physiological complex of events, such as earthquakes and storms, which have constant challenging effect upon the individual biological inventiveness, wherein both the challenges and the cause are regenerative. Our commonwealth is also multiplied in further degree by experimentally derived information, which is both multiplying and integrating the wealth advantage at an exponential rate. The synergetic effect upon the rate of growth of our incipient world commonwealth augmentation has been entirely overlooked throughout all the accounting systems of all the ideologically divergent political systems. Our wealth is inherently commonwealth, and our commonwealth can only increase, and it is increasing at a constantly self-accelerating synergetic rate. Editor's note: assuming that knowledge is transmitted from generation to generation. Assuming that the knowledge itself doesn't become destroyed in some way. Moving on. However, we inadvertently dip into our real, unaccountably fabulous wealth in a very meager way only when our political leaders become scared enough by the challenges of an impressively threatening enemy. Then only do socialism and capitalism alike find that they have to afford whatever they need. The only limitation in the realization of further wealth is that production engineers must be able to envision and produce to design and practice the production multiplying steps to be taken, which progressive envisioning depends both on the individual and on the experimentally proven, but as yet untapped, state of the pertinent metaphysical arts, as well as upon the range of resources strategically available at the time, and in particular upon the inventory of as yet unemployed but relevant inventions. In respect to physical resources, until recently, man had assumed that he could produce his buildings, machinery, and other products only out of the known materials. From time to time in the past, scientists discovered new alloys which changed the production engineering prospects. But now in the aerospace technology, man has developed his metaphysical capabilities to so advanced a degree that he's evolving utterly unique materials on order. Those new materials satisfy the pre-specified physical behavior characteristics which transcend those of any substance previously known to exist anywhere in the universe. Editor's note, by humanity. Thus, the re-entry nose cones of the man-launched and rocketed satellites were developed. Synergy is of the essence. Only under the stresses of total social emergencies, as thus far demonstrated by man, do the effectively adequate alternative technological strategies synergetically emerge. Here we witness mind over matter, and humanity's escape from the limitations of his exclusive identity, only with some sovereigntized, circumscribed geographical locality. Thus concludes Chapter 6, Section 2.7 of Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. Editor's note. I'm going to try to sum this up as best as I can understand it. Basically what he's saying is, over time, man's knowledge has increased. The increase of that knowledge has caused him to compare that knowledge to previous knowledge in a somewhat automatic fashion. That comparison brings new insights. Those insights then become the metaphysical model of what we call efficiency. And we've evolved to such a degree, intellectually, that we can now look for specific new insights to happen which haven't even occurred yet. For instance, he's using the example of alloys in airplanes. We can say, if we're going to build this airplane, we're going to need to design an alloy that has, such and such, let's say, heat resistance, and such, we'll say, thermodynamic power. And then we design it. So our knowledge has advanced to such a degree that we can actually set out to find new insights based on our needs before the insights even occur. And I think what he's getting at is, from this point of view, we can plan effectively in a way that has no relation to capital or money or gold or concentrations of anything whatsoever, and base our, we'll call it an economy, on something that's much more real, which is the ability to intentionally engineer insights to solutions to problems on a metaphysical level about physical things we're creating to solve our needs as human beings. That should be, I believe he's saying, and I certainly know I'm saying, the baseline of what an economy is actually built around is the intentional seeking and planning to find new insights to create more efficient systems and inventions to serve the needs of humanity on a willful basis, where we direct our own labor on purpose, where wealth is recognized as the ability to seek that knowledge itself and not some stupid coin or gold bar or piece of paper. That's what I think he's getting at. But he's doing it in a very verbose way, in such that his vocabulary sounds like Jimmy Neutron or something. And I think he's doing it to kind of go over the heads of business people on purpose, because they're going to object to what he's saying if he says it in a more forthright, plain, and direct way. But it's also just the way Bucky thought. So, now again, this is my projection, so I could be wrong. That's my editor's note on that chapter. Very fascinating chapter, I think. Tomorrow we'll continue with 2.8, Chapter 7, Integral Functions. See you then. Alam.